Hi, I'm Kyle Blakely with Mark Waller, and this is the We Have Issues podcast. We have another episode this week we think will be interesting in light of a lot of the things that have happened nationally over the last couple of days. We have a couple of guests who are going to join us to talk about that. So let's get started. How you doing, Mark?
I'm well, but you're committing the cardinal sin of podcasting once again.
What?
Like and subscribe if you enjoy our content. Do it even if you don't enjoy our content.
Good. I'm going to have to start writing this down because I can't seem to remember it. So,
I'm guessing, Kyle, you might be just a little bit distracted though, because it looks to me like you're in a smoke-filled room.
I am helping make deals for Kamala Harris.
I mean,
So
that's, you did debate prep, visited Camp David. Now you're in the smoke-filled rooms, helping them make the decisions. If only people realize the oomph that Kyle Blakely brings to this world.
yes, years from now, there'll be a book about me just being kind of in the background of a lot of historical events. I'm kind of like a modern day Forrest Gump.
Yeah, just trying to make things happen all over the world.
Or
Next
just
thing you know, are you going to be
stumbling into
like,
things.
yeah, or what? Next thing, are you going to be like negotiating the deal between Hamas and the Israelis?
That clearly I have many talents, so maybe that will be one of my next stops.
Maybe getting Putin out of the Crimea. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
So I know we're going to get to our guests here in a second. But it has been kind of an interesting few days in American history, I would say. Looking at some of the things that have happened with Biden getting out of the race, and just since that happened, and we were able to start this episode, it looks like Kamala Harris has locked up the nomination. So that's what our guests are going to get into today with us.
I got to tell you, if ever there was a time to start a podcast where you're doing moderately smart analysis, this is the time to do it. Absolutely. I mean, it seems like every single day something major happens, something new happens. I mean, and not even just talking about Kamala Harris, which we're going to get into pretty significantly, but did you see this hearing yesterday with the Secret Service director? My God.
I did not get a chance to watch any of it. I saw a little bit of the news coverage afterwards, but yeah. And then today she turns around and resigns. So, but you watched a little bit of it yesterday, didn't you?
Yeah, I was watching it kind of in the background in my office while I was doing my work. And holy mackerel. Listen to that. I was surprised she didn't just get up and walk out at one point. But I'll tell you, it was, it was incredibly frustrating to watch. It was disappointing to watch. It was irritating to watch. It was a little bit like watching a bit of a car wreck. I mean, these people would ask her questions. It didn't matter. This was completely bipartisan. You can take the Democrat and the Republican out of it, completely bipartisan, right? You got the one of the Democrats from Florida. I thought he had one of the best comments of the day. He's like, "Did you happen to see the hearing that was held in education with the presidents from the three major universities?" And she's like, "No, I didn't get a chance to see that." Like, what are you getting at? He said, "They left the hearing and they were all fired." This sounds a lot like that. I was like, "Holy shit, man."
They at least let her resign.
She wouldn't answer any questions. She, was being like incredibly evasive, said everything was, I can't talk about it because it's under investigation. They would ask her the simplest of questions, and then still it would be all about, this is under investigation. I can't talk about that. A bunch of them said, you gave more information to the news media than you're giving to this congressional hearing. After I saw that, I was like, there is no way she is going to last. And, sure enough, she's out today. The other
Yeah.
frustrating part of that for me was this. I thought that a lot of the Democrats, almost all of the Democrats on the committee, tried to use that as an opportunity to talk about gun control. And it just seemed incredibly tone deaf to me to be talking about that issue when this is about, the security and safety of the heads of our nation. Like, why
Yeah.
make this about something that it's not?
And
Um,
that's kind of par for the course nowadays, though, it seems like. It's nobody nobody really wants to address the issue at hand. They want to figure out how they can get across their talking points.
yeah, I mean, one of them was like, nobody's talking about all the people that get killed in my district with guns. No, it takes an event like this. Like, come on, these, it sucks anytime anybody gets killed in any kind of violence, right?
Yeah.
Certainly we need to be looking at in America the underlying issues there a whole lot more than what kinds of tools are used to commit violent acts. It seems to me.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I from my standpoint, again, you studied or looked at it a lot more in depth than I did, but just from my perspective is the fact that the head of one of the most important departments within our federal government appears to be just, I don't know if inept is the right word, but just not that strong of a leader. And I think you like to sit back in your home and think, wow, hopefully the top people in our government are smart and know what they're doing. And in and then something like this happens and you see that response and you're like, holy shit, who, who is in charge?
Well, I'll tell you, Kyle, I think one of the good pieces of news that might come out of this, it should put all these conspiracy theories to rest because the incompetence displayed yesterday and throughout this entire investigation, and the whole incident in and of itself should demonstrate to people that the Secret Service is not competent enough to engage in a conspiracy, to commit such an act as allowing or participating in the assassination of a former president and presidential candidate. I mean,
Interesting.
incompetence galore.
Wow. Wow. So, do we have anybody in the waiting room?
Well, we do, but let's looks like Vince is in the waiting room. I'll let you introduce him, but let's, we haven't talked about it. We haven't teed it up yet to discuss all
True.
of this stuff that's happening. What do you think about all this over the last couple of days and Kamala Harris being the coronated, anointed, handpicked successor to move forward?
Well, from my perspective, I certainly thought over the net since the debate and all of that issue, I certainly thought we would see Biden step out of the picture at some point. And, when it happens or when you're thinking about it happening, you can imagine all kinds of things of what that might look like. And, people speculating on, it's going to be an open process at the Democratic convention, all of those kinds of things. But it transpired very differently and very quickly, and probably makes you think that this has been being worked on for a couple of weeks before they rolled it out. And I think they just wanted to get through the Republican convention, let the Republicans waste all their breath attacking Biden, and then obviously right after that, then be able to make this announcement and hit the ground running. So all incredibly fascinating. And again, I mean, I was probably 6 years old when LBJ said that he wasn't going to run again back in 68, but he did that in March, which
Mm-hmm.
allowed time for the primary process to kind of continue and help resolve that. And this is so much different and really is a milestone event in the history of our country that we're watching unfold. So I'm interested in talking to our guests about it a little bit more. But I don't know. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me. I thought that your point about getting through the Republican convention and kind of taking the wind out of their sails that way. I think that's a good one. That's one I certainly hadn't considered and hadn't thought about. But I think you're right. I mean, my Democrat sources are telling me that, the fix has been in for the last couple of weeks. And I'll tell you, it sort of makes sense to me. I see a little bit of evidence of that. I get all their text messages. I get all their emails. And I mean, within minutes of the president announcing that he wasn't going to run again, that he was going to step away from the campaign, my inbox is getting blown up with text messages saying support Kamala Harris, right?
Yeah.
So
they
the other
had
thing
to
that I
have
think is
all
sort
that
of
stuff ready to
fascinating.
go.
What's that?
They had to have that all ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I think that's fascinating about this, all the Democrats are saying, we want to have a fair and open process where you can pick anybody you want at the convention as long as it's the one person we're giving you to pick. I mean, it just seems ridiculous to me. Come on. Like this is going to be some sort of process. In my mind, she's the anointed, handpicked successor here. And this convention's going to be nothing more than a coronation for her.
Yeah. And it'll be fun to talk to our guests about kind of their perspective on that take. Is that a good thing that it's happening this way? Or could it ultimately hurt her that there wasn't an open process?
Well, we had two guests today. We got Vince Bzdek from the Gazette going to be joining us. And then hopefully my good friend Lois Court, former state senator, Democrat from Denver, is going to be joining us as well. But I actually think that she was the IT specialist for Delta Airlines. So we'll see if she can get in the room. Here, let's admit Vince now.
Great.
Mark, Cal, how are you?
Good. What's happening?
Hey, I'm up here in a purple haze, man. Agent Gay.
Well, look at Kyle's background there, Vince. He's in the smoke-filled back rooms of the halls of the Democratic Party, helping them anoint Kamala Harris.
Although I could just as easily be outside in Colorado Springs right now with our air quality alert. So
they look about the same. Yeah.
Yeah. God. So, well, thanks for joining us today, Vince. This is great. Appreciate it. I think I mentioned to you, we may have Lois Court, former state legislator, Democratic state legislator, joining us here in a little bit. But in the meantime, we'll kind of jump in and get started on the conversation. But, again, for me, one of the things, Vince, I mean, you worked at the Washington Post for 18 years.
I apologize to interrupt you here, but I just see that Lois Court is in the waiting room. I'm absolutely shocked by this. I didn't think she had the technology chops to do this, but apparently she got her Delta Airlines issue fixed. So can I admit Lois into the room?
Yes,
we'll raise the IQ of our podcast even further. I mean, that's what you do for us, Vince.
Yes,
right.
Lois, even more.
Yeah, I agree. Yep. I agree.
Our goal is always to outkick our coverage with our guests.
Have you had a chance over the years to meet Lois, Vince? Have you had a chance to talk to her at all?
I never have. I know her record well.
Lois is absolutely okay. Lois, you're on mute right now. So if you could unmute yourself, that'd be awesome. And then show us your lovely face by turning on. There she is. Oh my God. Hello. I can't believe you did this.
I didn't. My husband did. I'm totally incompetent. You know that, Mark.
Yes. Can I share with folks, Lois, Lois and I go way back. We were freshman legislators together in the state house. She is absolutely one of my most favorite people in this entire world. I'm sure people are going to call me a rhino for that because she is a hippie, liberal, Denver Democrat like no other, but a quality person.
The reason that I have joined a little bit late is that I had to get my last load of laundry hung on the line because I am an old hippie and I'd prefer to not use electricity when not necessary on a 90-degree day here in Denver. So I hung my laundry out on the line. So
Classic.
Mark's description is correct.
Classic.
Well, I
classic.
always said there's, when it comes to Lois, there's nobody that wants to do more good for the people of the state of Colorado than her. There's just nobody that's more wrong about how to do it than she is. But we can sort of put that aside. I was like, just to illustrate who Lois Court is. Several years ago, we're in this committee hearing. It's super early in the morning, and she comes in and she lays out this, beautiful vegetarian breakfast as she's getting ready to eat, and somebody comments on it, and I was like, oh, I brought my breakfast too. I reach into my coat pocket and I pull out some Pop-Tarts, and Lois is like, oh my God, no, you cannot do that. And I was like, I'm fine. Next time we had the hearing, guess what? She said, Pop-Tarts are unacceptable. She brought breakfast for me as well. And that's who Lois Court is. One of my absolute favorites. We don't get to see each other near enough, but by God, I love you.
You know what, Mark? The joy of being in elective office, and those of you on this who are also in elective office or have been in elective office know that the most important thing that can happen is develop relationships. Because whether it's on your side of the aisle or the other side of the aisle, trying to craft public policy that is the best for the people of the state of Colorado takes all viewpoints, all perspectives, and working with others is the way we get things done. And Mark and I always worked really well together. We agreed sometimes, we disagreed sometimes. I'll describe another relationship that I had, which was the way I liked to do business when I was at the Capitol. Don Coram, whom many of you probably know, who's a good old boy from Montrose. I adore Don. We all served together. Don would come up to me and put his arm around me. He's a big man, and put his arm around me and describe our relationship this way to people as we were just meeting them. Yep, I love Lois. We're just like an old married couple. I love her completely. We fight like hell and never have sex, just like an old married couple.
All right, with that.
That's a really good story. Well, Lois, I'm Kyle, Mark's partner in crime here, and it's very nice to meet you. And joining us today also is Vince Bzdek. Vince is the editor of the Colorado Springs Gazette, the Denver Gazette, and Colorado Politics. So I don't think you guys have had a chance to meet before, but
I think perhaps in our distant political past we may have, but it's nice to see all of you today.
Nice to see you, Lois.
yeah.
Hi.
So, well, we are very appreciative of both of you coming on today because as we were talking about right before when Mark and I were chatting, just the two of us, this is kind of a historical moment in American history. I mean, LBJ backed out, said he wasn't going to run in 1968, but that was back in March of that year and let the primary process run out. But having somebody step aside after the primaries, and then just in the 2 days, basically, since that happened, and we're talking now, it appears that the whole situation's resolved. So I'm just curious, maybe to start with here, and Vince, you can start. What's your perspective on this as you've seen it unfold?
Well, Kyle, I agree with you. It's momentous. Changing a major party presidential nominee this late is unprecedented in modern political history, as you said. Even when I worked at the Washington Post, I don't remember this much history in a compressed amount of time, the last 8 days. I was the front page editor in Washington when Bush v. Gore happened. And that was pretty incredible because I remember we published about 35,000 papers, printed them, that said Bush had won. And the editor said, can we pull those back? And so I had to call out to the press room and get 35,000 papers thrown away. And we changed our headline to deadlock. That's the last I can remember of something so momentous. But I think this is more so. And for a journalist, this is really fun because, there's a million storylines. It's more of a horse race now, I think. And it's it becomes an interesting exercise in democracy again. And I think, part of what's really fascinating to me is the candidate listened to sort of the voices of his party, the voices of people and polls, and made a decision to drop out. And that to me shows kind of a healthy democracy still working with all our threats and stresses and, complaints right now. It seems like there's still some responsiveness to the people in this country.
Yeah. And if you believe some of the stuff you read online, though, they had him tied up in a room at his house and weren't going to let him go until he did back out.
Well, that's what Lois was doing, right? That's why she was late getting on the podcast.
Lois, how about you? What, I mean, again, you've been an elected official. You've been through processes of being nominated, those kinds of things. How do you see it?
Here's what I know. What I know is that 4 years ago, right now, oh no, a little bit ago, I was in a hospital paralyzed with Guillain-Barré. I knew I had to resign because I couldn't get to the Capitol. And that racked me with anxiety. The doctors had to treat my anxiety at the same time as the Guillain-Barré. But why I'm bringing this up is the magnitude is significantly different. But what is important to recognize, and those of you, I know Mark's been elected, and Kyle, I think you're currently sitting on city council or have served.
I actually have not been elected to anything since I was elected sophomore class president in college.
All right. So 2 of us are previous electeds, 2 of us are not. But understand that once you are an elected official, that is who you are. It is not a job. It is not just a position. It is your identity. And so for Joe Biden, for whom being a public servant, and we can disagree about the value of his service, but he was a public servant elected by the people for 50 years. And for him to give that identity up, for him to acknowledge that it is time to say, I am no longer appropriate with this identity, that took a lot. I admire that he recognized that he could. I don't think that he felt that he could not do the job. I think he felt he could not do the campaign. And I believe completely that he understands in his soul that this is a threat to our country's survival with Donald Trump coming into the White House potentially again, and that Biden wanted to avoid that. And when his people told him, we don't think you're going to be our best person to bring the case forward to the American people in the next 100-ish days, we are concerned. And I think he heard that. And I think to his core, he is a public servant, and to his core, he knew that it was time to say, I can't provide this service any longer. That's got to have been really hard. Again, the magnitude of mine was significantly different, but I understood it when he went through it because of the little teensy experience doing the same thing that I had. The other thing I will say along those lines is that he knew that there were others, and of course he picked his vice president, but he also knew that there were others who could prosecute, pun intended, this campaign better than he could. And that was, I'm sure, the core of his decision.
I'm going to push back just a little bit here on both of you. I don't mean to be disagreeable because I love you both tremendously. But come on, Lois, you didn't have George Clooney calling you and telling you to get out of the race. You didn't have Barack Obama calling you, telling you to get out of the race.
George Clooney.
I mean, there was a lot of pressure put on him. Obviously, I think he actually believes he is the right guy to do it. But once the donors all stepped away and said, you know what, we don't think you're the right guy to do it, then maybe, that's the kind of thing that convinced him that he wasn't the right guy to lead the party moving forward.
Well, here's the point that I want to make, and we can disagree, Mark. We have for about 100 years.
For lots of years.
So that doesn't matter.
And you've always been right and I've been wrong. I accept that.
Clearly. But the point I was trying to make was how excruciating the decision must have been for him, because he was not only giving up the campaign and the position, he was giving up his identity. This is who he has been for 50 years, is a public servant. And I completely recognize that persona. And having to say, I will no longer be that after the next 100-ish days, or actually 6 months till January, I recognize, regardless of why he did it as far as influences, the excruciating acknowledgement that this is not who I will be anymore is what I was trying to get at.
In that, I certainly can appreciate and accept and agree with Jan. You know, it seems to me it's been a little bit, interesting. Kyle and I were talking. I think this plan's been in the works for a couple of weeks. I mean, it wasn't 10 minutes after he announced that I'm getting a text message from Kamala Harris saying, please contribute, support me. I mean, that stuff obviously had to be prepared at some point in advance. So I think the question now becomes, well, all right, he's out, but where does this take the Democrats moving forward? Does it substantially increase their chances? And I'm curious to know, Vince, what do you think about, just where does this put them in terms of having an opportunity moving forward? Because I think everybody understood the writing was on the wall. Joe Biden stays in the race. Donald Trump's going to be the next president.
I think it's a great big question mark right now, Mark. I mean, in head-to-head polling with Trump that I've seen, she's similar to or a bit above Biden. Her favorables and unfavorables are similar to, maybe a little bit better than Biden's, but nothing very different right now. And she's very much tied to the Biden administration, right? And that's been, he's been in negative land for quite a while because of voters upset with inflation, cost of living. The Republicans have worked the immigration issue very well, and she's going to be considered more liberal than Biden. So she's going to have to, finesse that somehow. She's also never won an election atop the ticket in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Michigan. She's never won an election atop the ticket anywhere but California. The Biden administration's record is unpopular. She's not going to be able to make a clean break from it. The other thing that I think you're kind of hinting at is that for the first time in more than 50 years, the Democratic Party's nominee will not be chosen by voters in an open primary, but in more of a process like the one that looks like Kyle's in right now.
Smoke-filled back room. That's what that is.
Back rooms. And, I think you're already hearing the Republicans kind of trying to make hay out of that and there's even a legal challenge Republicans are filing to try to stop this process. I don't think that'll succeed, but she's got some hills to climb. But as Lois said, she's a prosecutor, and she's already kind of framed her, campaign as a prosecutor versus the felon. She was never able to do that in 2020, where she was really, able to really define and use some of that prosecutorial talent. And I think she will now, because back in 4 years ago, it was a completely different landscape where there was a lot of criticism of police and, soft prosecutors. And I don't think she knew quite how to navigate that. Now this is a plus for her, where she can, as Lois said, prosecute the case against Trump, very aggressively. And she's also been a strong voice on reproductive rights, and that's helped her sort of establish herself as more of a force in the party and in politics for the first couple of years until she did that. She didn't have a clear identity. She didn't have a clear mission, I don't think. And now she's much more so got that clear mission, and I think she will prosecute that. So I think it'll be a lot more dynamic campaign. But Mark, she's still part of the Biden administration, and there's still those real negative numbers that she's got hanging around her neck. So that's kind of what I'm thinking right now.
Lois, how about you? I mean, again, you've been in the Democratic Party for a long time. As an elected official, you've been closer to a lot of these things. I mean, what do you think? Does this improve their chances, or do you think this could be an issue doing it so late?
Here's my take. The Democratic Party, and particularly the people, were deflated. They were frustrated, embarrassed, horrified in some ways with Biden's debate presentation, and knew from the get-go that we did not want a rematch of two old farts, excuse me for my language.
Oh, that's just horrific. We'll have to edit that out. I mean, because we don't cuss on this podcast at all.
Being one,
You can say old shits if you want.
Yeah.
Being one, I can say it. So anyway, I don't think most Americans, I mean, polling shows this, wanted a rematch of the same two old guys. So I think then there was a very core Democratic base that was going to go for whoever we put up, and a very core Trump base, bigger, that was going to go for Donald Trump. So that was a given. But the edges of both groups were deflated because even those who want to vote Republican did not want to vote for Donald Trump, knew they were probably going to have to. But on the D side, the base, the edges of the base particularly, was so deflated. This energizes them. This gives them a reason to get out there. This gives them a reason to say, we have a vibrant, capable, exciting candidate. Whether everybody, Democrats or otherwise, think her policies are fabulous or not, isn't really the point. The point is the energy for the campaign. And at this point, I have been reading some, flash poll kinds of things, and people are saying, Democrat or Republican, some were saying, I was so sick of these guys, I didn't even think I was going to bother voting. But the Democrats now are saying, I'm getting out there. I'm excited that we have a vibrant candidate. And you can say anything you want about her policies and about her mistakes in the past, lots of validity there, depending on your perspective. But she does have energy. She is vibrant. And this is where I think it will make a difference on the edges. For independents who lean one way or the other way, maybe they'll start leaning a little more left than they would have when it was Biden. So I think the most important part of this decision is the energy it brings back to Democrats and leaning independents.
Hey, what's interesting for me, because I agree with a lot of that. What's interesting for me, I've been thinking about it over the last 2 days. And my first perspective was they should have done this a year ago when the primaries could have been competitive or whatever. But the more I've thought about it, and if you look at this like, okay, I ran cross country in high school. And the whole idea is you want to go through the season and you want to peak right at the state race at the end. And if she had been the one chosen 3 months ago or 4 months ago or whatever, she would have had a lot of momentum to start with, and she could be dropping off by now. But starting this late, she could ride this wave all the way into November, I think. So from that standpoint, I've kind of come around to the idea that doing it this late may prove to be a huge benefit in the long run, because God knows, well, and I've been sick of listening to him for a number of years, people are tired of listening to Trump. at this point. And this is something new to listen to, especially if you're on those fringes like you're talking about.
Though, here's, and I want to put this to Vince. I might tend to agree with you there, Kyle, but I think part of the issue here is this has become a coronation. Everybody has said, hey, we welcome a process. We want to have, you delegates, whoever, have your opportunity to choose your candidate, as long as you choose the one that we put in front of you. I think that voters tend to not like handpicked successors. And that's, to me, what this looks like. And I think that we experienced that here in Colorado Springs with the mayoral race a couple of years ago. John Suthers handpicks Wayne Williams as his successor, anoints him as the next mayor, before voters have a chance to vote. And the constituency really pushed back on that, right? And we end up with Yemi Mobolade as the mayor. Is there some analogy to be drawn here? And is that a concern for folks moving forward? Vince?
I think it's a very good point, and it kind of surprises me, Mark, how quickly the Democrats have coalesced around here.
Me
Although
too.
Obama hasn't come out and endorsed her yet, which is interesting. But every other major Democrat has. And that surprises me a little bit. And there were some people who kind of wanted an open convention, to really sort of show, what democracy looks like as, run by the Democrats. But I think there's just so much worry about Trump. And Lois kind of expressed this, that, and they think it's just such a dramatic threat that they feel like they've got to get their act together and unify quickly. I was surprised at that record-breaking amount of money she raised, $100 million in 24 hours. So
I think it's like 200 million now. It's
is it really?
insane.
Yeah. I think some of that's also in response, Mark, to how unified the Republicans were. And that was sort of an astonishing show of unity for a party that, has a lot of different policy differences, even between the vice presidential nominee and the president, right? But they really managed to say it's a big tent and it's an inclusive party and really project that unity. I think that might have scared the Democrats into trying to do much the same thing. And that they've got to do this on such an accelerated timetable. Literally, they have to have this sort of virtual primary by August 7th. That's like 2 weeks away, right? In order to keep this process rolling and make sure that she's the nominee. But as a journalist, Mark, I would have loved to see an open convention, man. That would have been fun. When there's actual surprises at a convention, oh my God, that would be so good for people, and probably great TV too, right?
Yeah,
well,
without a
I
doubt.
think if the convention had been now, like this week, it might have been different, but because theirs was a month after the Republicans, if you waited 4 more weeks to pick somebody, then you're really up against it trying to get to November. So I think the timing of the convention probably had a lot to do with this too.
All of us.
Yeah, please, I was going to you. Yeah.
All of us have been in and or watching politics for hundreds of years, maybe not quite hundreds, but
well, you have.
Thank you, sweetheart. Timing is everything. Timing in politics is everything. Getting into a race when you are at a point that most people will pay attention to you, getting into a race when you think you have the financial support behind you. Timing is everything. And I completely agree with the perspective that had this happened a few months ago, there would have been an open primary. I think that would have happened. And I also agree with the perspective that had this happened a few months ago, there'd be more time for people to be getting sick of her. But I think this timing fits very well for the Democrats. There doesn't have to be a contentious primary. this is who and she's got from what I read this morning, she's got the delegate count already to be the nominee.
Mhm.
So this is a done deal. So we
do you think because it's a done deal, it's going to disenfranchise some voters?
I really, Mark, I think that there will be those who will argue about the small d kind of piece of it. But, Trump didn't really have much of a primary this time either. I mean, there was Nikki Haley, basically. But they didn't even bother creating a platform. They anointed him their God. I mean, if you want to talk about two candidates who come from a very
first of all, he's not a god. He's our cult leader. Okay, let's get that right. It's
thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, well, but speaking the party platform, the party line.
Yeah, the point is that neither of the presidential candidates is a normal kind of pick, in that the processes have been so different. The attitudes about them, even within their parties, are so different. And so for me, the most important piece is what will and this is what everybody's talking about and will continue to talk about, the people who are, and I've said this for 100 years, most Americans are just to the left or just to the right of center. Donald Trump represents way to the edge. And to many people, Kamala Harris will be painted as way to the edge. I don't think she is, but she will be painted that way, as we've noted. So then the question becomes, those people who are here in the middle, just to the left or just to the right, with whom will they be most comfortable? Which of these two candidates will they feel they trust enough to be president for 4 years? And to me, that is going to be the key. And the process that they've each gone through is, we've said the word a billion times, unprecedented. We are not in normal, quote unquote, political times, certainly not in the kind of political times that any of us on this program experienced in our political lifetime. It's just a different world.
Yeah. Well, one of the things to me that kind of gets lost a little bit in this big focus on her and this, again, unprecedented time in our history, is what happens with like the House of Representatives races and the Senate races, and even down ticket into like the Colorado legislature. I mean, do you think this motivates more Democrats to get out and vote, and that helps that side quite a bit, or will it not have any impact at all? What are your thoughts on that?
Well,
I believe.
Go ahead, Liz.
I was just going to say, I believe thoroughly that this will help down ballot candidates, because it will energize, as I said before, that base that wanted to elect Democrats, but was worried about Biden and was going to just say, I'll sit this one out. I'm tired of all of it. Now we have someone that they can get energized about. And so to the extent, and this is going to be a challenge, both parties need to convince their loyal voters to go all the way down the ballot. But I think this will help energize certainly Democrats to do that.
Hey, Kyle, I agree with that. And, going back to the pressure campaign that Mark was referring to, I think that's where it started to tip in favor of his exit, was Pelosi jumped in there. And Pelosi is such a good vote counter, and still, I think, considered sort of the boss of the party in many ways. She grew up in Baltimore. Her dad was a mayor, and she sat there, Kyle, when she was 9 years old, and kept a list at the front door of everybody who came to visit the house so that they could extract political favors from them later. So she knows how to count the votes, and I think when she got involved and started making noise about how if you stay in, President Biden, it's going to hurt the down ballot, it's going to hurt the House and Senate races, then it started to get to a new tipping point. And I think she cares more about that than anything, more about, the power of the party than the individual players. But I think that's where the pressure got to be the most heated, Mark, was, when they're talking about these down ballot races and losing the House and Senate both, right?
Well, Vince, I think that is spot on. Absolutely 100% correct. I mean, I think what they were kind of looking at here was, here's where we are. We already have a bad map for the Senate. Chances are we're going to lose that. No doubt that Biden is going to lose to Trump in this thing. Now we might not even be able to flip the House. And all of a sudden, Republicans are going to have all three legs of the stool, right? And Trump's going to be able to move forward unfettered. Maybe we swap Biden out here. We still can't win the White House, but now we really increase our chances of being able to take the House back, which was, part of the plan all along, right?
And I think they wanted a guardrail in case Trump did win. And that was essential to their discussions. It's like, God, we need something to keep some, guardrail up in case he does win.
I think that an important word, Vince, that you just used was boss. Nancy Pelosi comes from the, as you pointed out, old time boss politics. And she is the House in the minds of a lot of people, whether Hakeem Jeffries is there or whether Johnson is there. That's flash in the pan to many people. She is the embodiment of the way politics has always gotten done. Now, recognizing, as I said a moment ago, and I think we all agree, we are not in a normal political world right now. Maybe that boss kind of position no longer really has the same consequence as it used to. But within the world that Nancy Pelosi and critically Joe Biden have always lived in, her perspective was very, very important because she did know how to look at the down ballot races. She did know how to say, Joe, this isn't just about the top of the ticket. And any voice saying that, many voices I'm sure did, but hers was crucial, I believe, in making him understand that the down ballot was part of this whole equation that we need to re-energize. And I can't use that word too much. The Democratic base was so despondent, and this has definitely re-energized. And we hope that it will re-energize all the way down the ballot. And that I think that was the crucial message that Nancy Pelosi was able to articulate like no one else could have.
So, well, in an election where, there are very few undecided voters, right? It is all about energy from the base and getting them out to vote. Yeah.
So along those lines, then how important is her vice presidential candidate? So, I mean, who she picks as her running mate, how important is that in this process? Is that worth 1 point, 2 points? I mean,
I think it should be lowest court. I'd consider voting Democratic as lowest court.
There we go. Now we're talking.
I like that. I like that. I mean, so far they've thrown out like 10 names. I think they were even asking Jared Polis, Governor Polis, if he'd be interested.
Which, by the way, I loved his line. Dana Bash asked him that on CNN yesterday. And he said, I don't know if they're looking for a 49-year-old bald gay Jew from Colorado, I'm your guy.
Yeah. That might just get him in there being
it was hysterical.
That quotable. So
I've never seen that guy be funny ever before, and he knocked that one out of the park.
I agree.
Yeah.
My perspective what do you think about?
Oh, go ahead, Lois.
Excuse me. I'm just going to say my perspective is it needs to be a swing state male, period.
Hero.
And I think that leads to Shapiro significantly. The question is whether or not he is ultimately the best choice, not just for the ticket, but for governance, and whether anybody will think about a balance between who she is and what she brings policy-wise and who he is and what he brings policy-wise, because that has to play into it too. I mean, what we're talking about and what we have been talking about for this whole program is the politics. But policy, you know, my predecessor, Andrew Romanoff, always said, of course you're running to have power, but you want the power to influence policy. And bless his heart, he was completely right. Full disclosure, he's a dear friend, but he was absolutely right. Nobody ought to run for office just for the power. And frankly, there are some who do. The particular orangutan now on the other side of the divide here is doing it for that reason. But no one really ought to run just for policy, for power. One ought to run to have the power to influence policy. And I think that the Democrats who are advising Harris at this point will emphasize that. I hope they will, and look for somebody who can bring to the ticket somebody with policy chops that are sufficiently different,
Well,
that they can balance the ticket that way. But again, it has to be a male from a swing state.
what about Mark Kelly though? You know, astronaut, American hero. You know, his wife, obviously the subject of an assassination attempt. Does that take some of the, you know, wind out of Trump's sails that he's gotten as a result of, you know, the assassination attempt? I don't know. Vince, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's funny, Mark, because that's kind of my favorite candidate right now. I mean, mostly because he's an astronaut, right? I mean, he has the coolest job of anybody. But he's also from Arizona, won in Arizona, which is a pretty red state. And he can talk about things, talk about policy, Lois. He can talk about the border really well. And he, you know, he has a pretty good take on it. I've already heard where he says, yeah, you know, the Republicans are talking a lot about it, but they're not doing a lot about it because they want it as an issue.
Yeah.
And, you know, these executive orders have sort of helped alleviate things. And I was part of a, you know, proposal to toughen up border control that was shot down by the Republicans. And he has some credibility to talk about immigration, which may help her because she's really wounded on that issue, I think. He also can talk about guns. I've heard him talk about guns a couple of times. The guy has guns. He wouldn't even say how many guns he has, but it's multiple guns. But he talks about guns in terms of gun safety, not gun control. It's like, yeah, we should own guns. That shouldn't change, but we should make it a lot safer to own guns. And so, you know, he kind of brings a different way for a Democrat to talk about some of these Republican issues that I think would be really interesting. And he's also, I think, seen as more moderate than Kamala. And I think she needs that, right? I think she needs to leaven the ticket with somebody who seems like a more moderate candidate. So that was my reaction, Mark.
Mark, what about you? What do you think the vice president pick should do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be Lois. Obviously, that's my first choice, without a doubt. And not just because she finally agreed to come on the show after begging her 97 times. Thank you for doing
You're
that.
trying to
I
butter her
appreciate
up,
it.
aren't you, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sure. You know, people always say it really doesn't matter who your vice presidential pick is, but in this election, I think it does matter. And I think it certainly matters for her. I thought Vince's analysis was spot on there with Mark Kelly. But I think you can make similar arguments for Pete Buttigieg. I think you can make similar arguments for, I mean, even, you know, we sort of joke about Jared Polis, but, you know, maybe Colorado's a little bit less of a swing state than it used to be, but, you know, business friendly Democrat from Colorado, you know, maybe you can make an argument there. I think the trick to the whole VP pick is normally that's something that takes months and months and months to do, to
The vet.
vet the candidate, go through their history, do all of that just combing through the vast amounts of data of their past. And that's something that, isn't going to necessarily be able to happen here. So probably one that's had more of that already, might be a little bit of a safer pick.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of Andy Beshear from Kentucky, who's he's won a couple races in a red state, and he really talks about common ground. Now, I don't know if Kamala wants to play that card, but I think a lot of people would be receptive to we need to come together and be less at each other's throats. I think that's what happened in the Springs a little bit, don't you, Lois, with our mayoral election, that people were
Yes.
kind of sick of that and
Mhm.
went to the candidate who said, hey, I can work with anybody. So I just think that's an interesting other piece of this.
Well, but you see, that's the point of a swing state candidate.
Yeah.
Is that any of these guys we're talking about, and other than Gretchen Whitmer, we're talking all about men, and any one of them brings that I can work with anybody kind of persona to the ticket. So then it comes down to, back to what Mark said a moment ago, being able to vet and know who the person is underneath everything else and how much time that could take. In today's modern era, I don't think it will take nearly as long as it used to, because we have the internet and there can be a half a dozen, 15,000 interns combing. And so I think that they can all be reviewed pretty thoroughly before a decision is made. I like the idea of Mark Kelly. I think he's a really, really attractive kind of candidate. But I also think the other names that we've mentioned can be attractive candidates as well. Again, to me, the decision has to be balance. And when, I'll just say it about Trump. I was astounded that he picked J.D. Vance. And the reason I was astounded is J.D. Vance is a spotlight hog. He loves to be out in front of people, just like the orangutan. And so that being the case, I was sure.
Now, you can't get mad when Donald Trump starts calling, Kamala, some name or something if you're calling him an orangutan. Just remember that.
He can go ahead and sue me. Go right ahead.
Did you teach your kids to talk like that? Come on.
Anyway, I'm just teasing. But the point, of course, but the point being that J.D. Vance can pull the spotlight off of Donald Trump. And I was shocked that Trump would accept a VP who could do that. But maybe there was method to his madness in his understanding that the electorate has been saying, we don't want these old guys. We don't want these old guys. So he picked this young mini-me to be there and to prosecute the case, pun again intended, for him. So some of the pressure is off of him, and that the people writ large can look toward Vance. And therefore, I think for Harris to pick another relatively young VP who can also be as aggressive as she can be, I think it's going to be really important.
Yeah.
So real quick, Kyle, two things here. Number one, I love this prosecutor versus felon thing. It reminds me of 1988. Notre Dame is playing, it's either 1987, 1988. Notre Dame's playing University of Miami in the national championship game, and they printed up all these T-shirts that said Catholics versus convicts. It's just got that vibe and that feeling to me in some way, and I think that's absolutely hysterical. We need to trademark and print the T-shirts right now, Kyle. Prosecutor versus felon. I think that would be awesome. Two, the identity politics of this. I agree with you, Lois. It probably does need to be a white guy in some way, and maybe even a little bit of an older white guy. I don't know. But it sucks that it has to be that, right? That it has to be, that identity politics plays such a big role in that. But But I like how clever Kyle has been here. You notice how he got us all to be talking about who we think the right person is, so he didn't have to take any heat. But who's your pick, Kyle? Who do you think it should be? What do you think it should look like?
Well, what's interesting is right when he announced, and it looked like people were starting to go for Kamala. My wife and I were talking about this, and my first suggestion, I said, it's got to be Buttigieg, because he is better at messaging and explaining things to voters than anybody else I've ever seen, maybe since Clinton. I mean, that skill of connecting with people and being able to boil things down, and he likes to go on Fox News and cut them down. And so my first thought was Buttigieg, but then I started thinking about the idea, and I read this somewhere. I'm not an expert on the electoral map, but from what I've read, it's going to be almost impossible for the Dems to win the White House without Pennsylvania. And if that's the case, then do you lean more towards Shapiro to help bring in his home state? But you never know. I mean, could a Mark Kelly help guarantee Pennsylvania if he can, and Arizona? So I'm sure they're pulling the crap out of that right now. So I don't know that I've settled on a single choice, but I think it's, those three are, and you throw in Bashir and there's four. And I think, somebody out of that group, I think would at least be a net positive for her.
What's interesting is we haven't mentioned Gavin Newsom, who I think will campaign for himself quite aggressively, because I think he does see himself as the next, big Democratic leader. But of course, that gives her no balance in California, right? And I think there's even a law that they lose their delegate votes, right?
Yeah. The Constitution says that you can't have them both in the same state. But beyond whether or not it would be kosher, it's not. It doesn't give any balance, and I think it would sink the ticket. I think I love Gavin Newsom, but I don't think he's an appropriate pick for VP.
What, we don't need a bunch of left coast liberals running the country. Is that what you're saying, Lois?
I'm
saying I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Oh, okay.
But I know the electorate well enough to know that the electorate would not be there, because they would say exactly what my sweetheart Mark just said.
I think Gavin Newsom endorsed her quickly.
Yes.
With the idea that if she loses, he's set up for 2028 possibly. And so.
And if she wins, cabinet position.
Right.
Exactly.
Secretary of State, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So I think he's a strategic animal, and he's factored a lot of that in.
All right. Now I'm going to throw something into you men. My first choice would be Gretchen Whitmer, but I do not believe a 2-woman ticket could win. What do you guys think?
I think it'd be historic and intriguing. And she's already said she won't do it, but of course, everybody says that sometimes. It reminds me of,
just for the record, Mark, I wouldn't either. So just for the record.
Well, I've been thinking about that, Lois, because remember when Clinton and Gore ran, and that was like an all-Southern ticket, and it's like, wow, is that smart? But then it projected this kind of one unified kind of thing you're getting. And my God, it's time for this country to elect some women. But God, Lois, I still think there's sexism at work here.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd like to think it doesn't matter. But maybe it does, right? I don't know. The sort of Pollyannishness in me would just like to think it, whoever it is. Again, I don't like the identity politics of this. A lot of people thought in 2016 when Trump picked another old white guy, he was, cooking his own goose then and there, but somehow, he won with Pence. This time around, I thought, is he going to pick another white guy, or is it going to be somebody else? And it seems to not matter to him. And maybe it doesn't matter if it's 2 white guys. I don't know. I would like to think that's not the case, but you know, I mean, we haven't even talked about, you know, an African-American man or, you know, whatever, some other person of color. I don't know. It shouldn't matter, but it probably does. How's that?
Oh, it does big time. It does big time. We all know that it does matter. It would be wonderful if it didn't. I agree with you, Mark, 100%, that it would be wonderful. And I love you describing yourself as Pollyanna. I think that's so cute. But we all know.
It's
that,
better than calling me Dennis the Menace like you've done for years.
That fits perfectly. But the notion of a 2-woman ticket, I just think we're not there. I just think we're not there. So I go back and I stick with my belief that it has to be a swing state male, period. And wherever it's going to get her the best balance electorally and policy is where she has to go.
You know, if I could just circle back to JD Vance real quick, because he's a swing state pick, right? And I thought it was a fascinating pick, even though he is a white male, because he sort of represents this working man, you know, persona, which he really, you know, his biography is really kind of fascinating. And I think he'll be able to work that pretty successfully and attract, you know, more working class people to the Republican Party, which would really change the equation that we've seen in the past. You know, he even made a pitch for unions in his acceptance speech, which I thought was fascinating. But I do think he has a lot of appeal to working class people who've been through a lot of the hard times that he has, and that he's going to be a formidable candidate for that reason more than anything else.
Interesting.
That's a great point.
Yeah. Well, we're at about an hour, so, and I think
I could keep this conversation going, but we should probably wrap it up.
Yeah. And in fact, you know, what might be interesting over the next few months is coming back and revisiting some of our thoughts from today and how they played out over time. I think that would be kind of interesting. So,
Lois, are you going to come back?
Depending on my terribly busy schedule.
Oh, I thought you were going to say depending on how much we're paying.
I'll help you hang your laundry out next time.
Yeah, I think I would enjoy. And again, thank you all for
as long as I don't have to touch your bloomers. That's all I care about.
I'm going to write in Lois Court for VP nominee, man.
Yeah, there you go.
That's where I am.
Exactly. Well, maybe, or if Polis goes that way, there'll be a lieutenant governor spot open. So,
well, no, it'd be a governor. Yeah, absolutely. And Lois, if you become the lieutenant governor, a job.
See, Diane Primavera would have to fill in as governor, and then you two have 2 old ladies in the governor's office. Colorado doesn't want that, and I'm done. I've given. I'm done. But thank you for your faith in me.
Well, both of you, thanks so much for being on today. And again, we'll see how this all transpires and then touch base down the road some to see if any of us are any decent prognosticators.
Great to talk about this history, Kyle. Thanks for having us, man.
You bet.
Thanks. We'll see you later. You can drop off, Lois.
Take care. So that was a lot of fun. A couple of really good perspectives on this. I loved Lois's take from being a long time part of the Democratic Party, and her understanding of politics and strategy and all of that, to me, I thought was great. And then again, Vince's perspective from being in the media and, you know, probably reading and studying this stuff 20 hours a day. I thought two really good guests.
It was a tremendous episode, and they're both entertaining as well, right?
Yeah.
Fun people to talk to. You know, Lois has always been a little bit of a policy wonk, which I've loved, but she's funny and she can, just kind of like we try to do here. Let's talk about some serious issues without taking ourselves too seriously. And it just absolutely perfect. And of course, Vince always adds a tremendous, what he does? He brings the knowledge level and just, makes it a little more highbrow of a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
He makes us look respectable.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is he was talking a lot about Nancy Pelosi. He has actually written 2 books, and one of them was on Nancy Pelosi
Oh, wow.
a few
Interesting.
years ago. Yep, it's called Woman of the House, and he wrote that book. And then right around the same time, he actually wrote a book about the Kennedy brothers. So he, while he was living in Washington, and so obviously studied a lot of those things pretty closely. So yeah, this is, as we said, we are living in historical times, and it's going to be really interesting over the next 100 days. Thank God it's going to be over in 100 days. If this shit was going to go on any longer, I'm not sure it would keep our attention, or we'd want to watch it that closely. But this is going to be a great race to the finish.
I've been trying to pay attention to all of this stuff that's going on. I watched all those hearings yesterday, of course, paying attention to Biden getting out and, Trump getting shot. It's like, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety, right? Like it's kind of welling up in me. And I'm like, why is this happening? To me right now, is, not me that's being impacted by all this, but you can just sort of feel the historic nature of everything that's going on here. And you can, feel the anxiety of an entire country as we go through these unprecedented times. So I think you're right, man. I'm glad it's only 100 days.
Yeah. One of the questions I was hoping to get to with them, and, maybe again over the course of this, we can talk about it, is what are the international implications for this? What are other countries thinking, or people in other countries, or leaders thinking, when they're watching this happen in the United States, that obviously is supposed to be the leader of the free world? And what are they thinking at this point in time?
That's a great question. And maybe that's something you'll hold for the next time. I'm sure they're both going to come back again. That's for sure.
Okay. So that brings us to what is pissing you off this week.
Well, that's we talk about all this anxiety going on. This is my therapy, right? Kyle, my therapist. This is kind of a unique one, and this may take just a little bit to get there. But one of the things that drives me effing nuts is inconsistency in politics, right? People have always asked me when I was in elected office, what's that?
Hypocrisy is rampant.
Oh, God. People always ask me, what's the hardest part about being in elected office? And I think they were, like looking for standing strong in your principles or fighting against the other side or something like that. And for me, it was always maintaining consistency. Because I've always believed, I always tried to look at it like a World War I battlefield. You shoot mustard gas on the other side, there's a chance that shit's going to blow back on you. And we see that happen constantly in politics today, right? I mean, constantly, but people don't even care about it anymore. They don't care about being inconsistent. We see it all the time. But here's the one that is sort of driving me nuts right now. Oh, Republicans are all crying about and Republicans in Colorado in particular, right?
Yeah.
All crying about the 14 million Democrats who are not going to be able to have their voice heard because they're going to have a bunch of super delegates vote and pick their nominee. Or let's say it a different way. They're going to have a bunch of delegates pick their nominee and not have voters decide. What does that sound like to you, Kyle?
Possibly the caucus system.
Oh my God, the caucus system in the state of Colorado. Abso-effing-lutely. And all these people who are like, we have to have the caucuses. It's the grassroots. It's the this, it's the that. All of a sudden, when the Democrats are using grassroots to pick their presidential candidate, it's not grassroots. It's a bunch of party insiders, right?
Yeah.
And I've been saying to people that have tried to make this, make these arguments in social media, wow, you just made an excellent point to get rid of the caucuses in Colorado, which is where I believe we should be.
And there's a ballot issue coming probably this November in Colorado to do just that you're talking about. And I'm hoping here in a few weeks, we're going to have some representatives from that issue on here to talk about it more. But you're absolutely right. And I'd love to see it as well.
Well, the one of the arguments you hear, in Colorado, right, you can access the ballot, the primary ballot, two different ways. You can go through the caucus process, get 30% of the vote, or you can go through the petition process and get the requisite number of signatures in order to get on the ballot, right?
Yep.
That's how you do it. And it's different for different offices. It's only 1,500 for congressional candidates, and that's out of an entire congressional district. It's 1,000 for state house races, but that's out of a smaller state house district. It's 1,000 for state senate, which is out of a larger group of people, so easier to accomplish. And one of the arguments I've heard about getting rid of the caucuses, well, it costs a shit ton of money to petition onto the ballot. And it does. It's about $20 a signature these days. And it gets even harder, for people that come from these much smaller, limited districts. That's for sure. And somebody's, complaining to me the other day, well, you only want rich people picking our candidates. I was like, listen, here's all you have to do is here's how we solve this problem in Colorado once and for all. Get rid of the caucus system, but then make it easier to gain access to the ballot through the petition process. Maybe you only have to go get a couple hundred signatures instead of 1,000, or maybe it's only 100 signatures. I don't know. Have some skin in the game in order to get on the ballot. Maybe you have to post a little bit of a bond to get on the ballot. If you can't raise $1,000, $2,000, whatever it is, you probably don't have a purpose to, you don't have any business being in the race in the first place. I mean, you got to be able to fundraise. You got to be able to go out and, be able to make your case to the voters. And that does take dollars. But I've thought, man, lower that number, get rid of the caucus, lower the number of signatures. You get rid of the party insiders picking the people, and you get rid of the rich people that are out there, that are buying candidates because it takes so much money to petition on the ballot. Problem completely solved. I think it does one other thing too. This is just, again, something that drives me nuts. And I think the Democrats have done this way better than Republicans in the state of Colorado, which is another reason we should get rid of the caucus. That is, you can be a third-party candidate, a libertarian, American Constitution Party, whatever it is. You can go to your assembly and do nothing more than raise your hand. I mean, literally, all you got to do is raise your hand, and you get the nomination to be your party's representative on the ballot. You gain ballot access that way. Now, maybe you can't win the race, but you can certainly impact the outcome of the race by doing that. Democrats figured that out years ago, and they would recruit people to become libertarians, and then have that libertarian pull 5, 6, maybe even 10% of the vote. And if they were able to do that, then that would enable the Democratic candidate in that district to win. And if you don't believe me, go look up the name Susan Quellish Nelson. Democrats recruited this person to run down in kind of the Fountain Fort Carson area, recruited this person to run as a libertarian, and in 3 different election cycles pulled enough of the vote that determined the outcome for the Republican, so pulled more vote than the Democrat won by.
Yeah.
And, that would get those kind of people out of the, get those people away from impacting the outcome of races as well, which is something we need in the state of Colorado. Because I think you should have to do more than just raise your hand at an assembly to impact the outcome of a race. I don't think that's right.
Yeah, I agree. I think our state is ripe for reform in this process. And in fact, I kind of agree with everything you said. There's a couple of things there I hadn't thought about before. but that might just be the solution. So, I mean, the third party thing is, I mean, the Republicans were trying to do it nationally with the no labels movement, trying to get a third party candidate in there, and maybe RFK Jr. ends up playing that role. Who knows? But yeah, but as far as here in Colorado, I am very anxious to see us change the system.
Well, I mean, we absolutely need to have that happen. You know, all of these Republicans that talk about purity tests and saying, hey, we need this if we just become more pure, we'll get more people elected. That is the dumbest effing logic I have ever heard in my entire lifetime. And I absolutely love in this case, the inconsistency of them saying those Democrats, those 14 million Democrats didn't get to have their voice heard. But we want to continue to prevent 900,000 or 1 million Republicans in Colorado from being able to have their voice heard.
Yeah. Yep.
Ridiculous. Hey,
Very.
Kyle, what can people do if they want to get more of this outstanding and great content that we continue to provide?
Well, you can follow us, subscribe on YouTube, and you can see our lovely faces every week. And in fact, I'm starting to like the way this smoke is framing my face. So I might just keep this as a permanent background. Or you can subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. So there's 18 or 19 different platforms. Subscribe. Obviously, it's free. And then you have access to this amazing content every week.
Riveting analysis and
Riveting
amazing
analysis.
content.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. And
Just
go like us on Facebook, and like our Facebook page. We all have issues. We're really promoting some great content there as well.
Yeah, I think some of the discussions on there are going pretty well. Some are a little still. I'm kind of amazed at some of the stuff that gets posted, but I feel like there's a real effort there to have some insightful, kind conversations about some of these issues. And so please do go follow that. Again, just know that it's our mission to consistently bring on people who are smarter than us. So,
which isn't hard to do.
But at least that's part of the bar that we've set here.
Absolutely. I think this is a great episode. Maybe one of our best so far.
Yeah, I agree. So looking forward to next week, and we will see you soon.
All right. Thanks, my friend. Talk to you later.
Take care, Mark. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.